Now my predecessor, a former Republican president, tells Putin, quote, "Do whatever the hell you want." That's a quote. A former president actually said that.
Together we will turn the page forever on the miserable nightmare of the Biden presidency. Joe Biden should not be shouting angrily at America. America should be shouting angrily at Joe Biden.
It's official as of this week. Donald Trump and Joe Biden are going for round two, and the federal government in this country is amping up its U.S. charm offensive.
The message that we're bringing about connecting the dots is not a partisan message. You know, I can tell you, I met with Republican governor, Democrat senators. When you talk about economic security, when you talk about supply chain resiliency, when you talk about national security, that's a message that is heard by everyone. And what I'm saying to them is that this is not just a nice relationship to have. This is a strategic relationship for the United States. It's the essential relationship, I would say.
Led by Industry Minister François-Philippe Champagne, who you just heard there, the so-called Team Canada is meeting with mayors, governors, and D.C. leaders, but very few people in Donald Trump's inner circle. Let's bring back the front bench on the balancing act with our biggest trading partner, Christy Clark, Mulcair and Paul Wells. Christy, I'll start with you. If the Team Canada came to you asking for advice for this round two, would you advise them to try and get as many meetings as possible, I guess I should say, with people around Trump?
Yes, absolutely. That's their job. And, look, I know that there's not a lot of folks in Ottawa who like Donald Trump. And I don't think many Canadians look forward to the way he might respond to Canada. But he could be the president. It's the most important relationship we have as a country. And we need to acknowledge that, spend our time speaking to those folks. But I do think that they're making some of the right moves there. So one of the things that Minister Champagne talked about was meeting with people at all different levels. So governors are really important, members of Congress, members of the Senate, city mayors of large cities. All of those things accumulate in terms of influence and really matter. But the thing, Vashi, that is most important for Canada is to remember that the Americans have a very transactional view of international relationships. So Canada needs to be able to put something on the table that's useful to the Americans. And traditionally, that has been our resources and the ready access to Canadian resources for the American economy. But it's also been, most notably recently, our willingness to do our bit in NATO and defend the continent. We have a job to defend our country, to defend our continent, and then to contribute to the defense of the entire world. As part of our relationship with the United States, we have really fallen down in that regard. And I guess the last thing I would say, Vashi, that drives Americans crazy is that they look at, in their country, they pay all the taxes that go to support defending the world. Canadians have decided for a long time that we'd rather pay for other things to look after our country. Things like healthcare, education, very worthy things to invest in, but that's really much come at the expense of our contribution to defending the world and to defending the continent.
What's the offer from Canada, Tom, in your view, if, as Minister Champagne said, basically the conversation is how we are strategically significant to the U.S., and that is the pitch. What is the specific offer do you anticipate the federal government should or could be making?
Well, I think that the pitch of Champagne is the only way to condition the ability to even think about making an offer. In other words, if you don't have those contacts with the big city mayors, and they reflect sometimes, if you make a connection with them, you let them know what is involved for their local companies in dealing with Canada. It's so easy for Trump to do like he did when he renegotiated NAFTA, just try to push everything aside, act like a bull in a china shop, and not take into account that relationship, which is our most important, but one of their most important as well. So I think that that's part of it. What's the offer from Canada? Continental stability, a reliable neighbor, a reliable trading partner. We can be a source. I mean, we're always getting dinged for more duties on our softwood lumber, but it'd be very hard to build a house in the United States at a reasonable cost if they didn't have access to Canadian softwood lumber. But I think we've got to start to refine our sales pitch about who we are and what we are as a reliable trading partner and be just that. But I'm quite enthusiastic about this approach. I think that Christy's right. You've got to figure out who his close advisors are and find some way to at least establish a relationship. But right now, they've only got one thing on their minds. It's an election in November. But getting some of those key messages through, and there are people who can help you with that, is important. But it is super important what's being done by the government right now. And I applaud them for it. I think that this idea of having a network of people you can call upon, when push comes to shove, because it will, because if Donald Trump becomes president, things are going to be haywire as usual, then you're going to at least have a few people that you can call. They might be able to provide a more positive message and soften whatever Trump is cooking up at that time.
The interesting part, if we're, broaching the prospect of at least making contact with people around Donald Trump, is if you think about it relative to Team Canada version 1, when those people were, Steve Bannon, who actually did engage with people like Jerry Butts here, the Steve Bannons are even no longer really in part of the closely knit tight circle. There's a lot of people there that, kind of don't operate with any sense of logic. How much harder, Paul, does that make the challenge for this government?
So it's less clear than it used to be who Trump's inner circle is. And one gets the impression there's an awful lot of people who are jockeying to get into Trump's inner circle because they figure he's essentially an empty vessel into which they can pour their own policy preferences. I expect a second Trump presidency would essentially be chaotic as all those factions try and make the president move and act the way they want him to, and essentially wrestle among themselves. But the United States remains a decentralized system with a bunch of checks and balances and a decentralized federation like Canada. And so the only problem with this Team Canada exercise is that it took a 4-year break. It shouldn't have. Even during the Biden presidency, Canada should have been activating its networks and reminding people who depend on Canadian trade and other relationships that they need to know that and talk about it. 4 years ago, they were saying things like 38 American states count Canada as their first trading partner internationally. That's a message that needs to get out because even a Trump presidency operates in a society and gets messages from a lot of inputs. And so it's smart for Canada to operate on those inputs rather than betting everything on the president-prime minister relationship, which too many of Trudeau's predecessors have done.
Just to expand things for a second, Christy, I wonder what your take is on where things stand in the U.S. election at the moment. And I know we're a number of months out, but this week they became the official candidates for their respective parties. A lot of concern around Joe Biden's mental acuity, and that was reflected in polling. Do you think his performance in the State of the Union will run counter to that? Or what is your impression of how things are unfolding between the two right now?
Well, the polls certainly suggest, and Vashi, you know that I'm not a big fan of polls way outside from election time, but the polls certainly suggested that it had an impact for people to see the kind of Biden outside of a tiny little clip and really quite performing, I thought, quite well in that speech. And what we see in the polls, I think, overall in the United States, still tells me that Biden has a decent to strong chance of winning, because it really depends where the votes are and how effective each party is in getting those voters out to the polls. So, you see President Biden, for example, sort of softening his stance around Gaza, suggesting they want to support food deliveries and things like that to Gaza. That is a play to get Muslim voters back on side for his team in the United States. So you're going to see a lot of that sort of stuff. And as everybody said, nobody in the States is thinking about Canada right now. They're all thinking about who's going to win the election and how they can make a contribution vote by vote by vote.
I just have 30 seconds left. Tom, last word to you on that.
I think that all of us who are involved in commenting and looking at and analyzing politics are going to have a ball for the next 6 months, because Donald Trump's going to be front and center. When he's not in court, he's going to be out there saying stuff that we will be commenting on. It is absolutely astounding and this is Christy's line that I agree with, that in a country of 350 million people, that it's these two people that are the best that they can put up for this election. It always amazes me. I'm not convinced that Biden's got it. I don't think that a lot of the vote that has softened is coming back to him. That vote includes a lot of women who would never have voted for Trump before, but they are very concerned about what they have seen with Joe Biden, and it's not one speech that has managed to convince them all to come back to the fold. So I'm a little less convinced that Mr. Biden can pull this off.
Well, we have a number of months to witness and figure out how it will happen. Thanks so much, everyone. Appreciate the discussion. Our front bench, Christy Clark, Tom Mulcair, and Paul Wells. Our takeaway is next. Stay right there.